it's a full moon. The moon is sort of like shining down on the hill. It's very peaceful, and you can smell the farm before you see it, and
Mm.
and then you kind of come over this hill, and down the hill you see this sort of like compound, and there's four big buildings, and each big building holds about 40,000 chickens.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 132 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I am super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Today, I am joined by Karol Orzechowski, a longtime animal advocate with a passion for advocacy, art, statistics, and tech. In addition to years of investigative work on factory farms, Karol is the director of Maximum Tolerated Dose, a feature-length documentary about the psychological toll of vivisection on both animals and humans. When he's not working for Faunalytics, Karol is the board chair of a nonprofit independent news publication in his hometown. Outside of work, Karol is often reading about computer hacking and infosec, organizing and performing at events at his local art scene, or walking with Raoul, the rescue dog. In this episode, Karol shares his experience as an undercover investigator, how even 20 plus years in, it is still possible to feel like the odd person out when surrounded by non-vegan family and friends. The study that launched what is now Faunalytics into the news, his vegan journey, and so much more. Hey, Karol, welcome. I'm so excited to chat with you tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Kimberly.
Um, as we always start here at Did You Bring the Hummus? Tell me about your vegan journey.
Oh gosh. I got into veganism through, well, I got into vegetarianism through punk music. I was a big fan of a Canadian punk rock band when I was growing up. I was a fan of a lot of punk rock bands growing up, but there was a Canadian band in particular named Propaganda that was, well, they still exist, and they were pretty influential in like politicizing me when I was a young person, when I was like 15, 16, you know? And it's funny when I think back to like how radical they were and all the various things that they talked about. I always, when I was a teenager, I still always felt like the animal rights piece was like a little too far. You know, they would talk about some really radical things, but the animal piece for me was still very difficult to kind of wrap my head around. And some of that was probably like growing up in like a Polish household, and you know, very like meat and potatoes kind of upbringing, and of course like living in just regular culture, which is very meat and potatoes. um and but I went to go see them play when I was 18. I had just moved away to college, and I was living in Toronto in Canada. And I went to go see them at a venue called the Opera House. And before they played, so you got a picture, it's a sold out show. The crowd is full of people, and they want to hear music. You know, we all came there to rock out with the
Yeah.
band. But before they start, they had someone come up on stage from a local animal rights group and show like a vivisection
Oh, wow.
video and talk about animal experimentation. And it was so intense, you know, it was so intense. And I was just so affected by that. And then they ended their set that night with a song called Purina Hall of Fame, which is uh, a song about this place called the Purina Hall of Fame, which is a building in Canada where they celebrate dogs and cats who have like rescued their human companions. But the song is kind of about how like we treat dogs and cats so well, but the Purina as like a brand is like built off of the suffering of other animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these things are sort of clicking for me. I'm at this show, I'm listening to these songs, I'm seeing this video. And when I got home that night, I told my roommate, I was like, do you want like all the meat or whatever that's in the freezer? Like, I'm not going to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't really wrapped my head around like that meant I was going vegetarian. I just sort of like, I didn't really think too far ahead. That was just sort of where things landed for me. And then when I was, later on, when I was living in Toronto, I started volunteering for a animal rights radio show called Animal Voices. And when I started volunteering for that show, I thought to myself, like, well, if I'm going to volunteer for this radio show, I'm not going to. I shouldn't keep eating like other animal products.
Right.
And so that was really influential in me going vegan. So there was about a 4-year gap where I was vegetarian before I was vegan. And that's sort of that's like the beginnings of the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love hearing everybody's story. It's like one of my favorite things about doing the podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's super fun when I hear someone else's story and I'm like, hey, that was kind of like me. Mm-hmm. I first learned about animal testing when I was probably like 15. Mm-hmm. And I stopped buying products that didn't say not tested on animals. But I didn't do anything else. Like, I didn't think beyond that. I just was horrified by the idea that we thought we needed to, drop drugs into bunnies' eyes and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't want to be part of that. Mm-hmm. But like, no thought about what I was eating or who I was eating, who I was wearing, none of that. But, and then when I was 20, mm-hmm. I got an issue of PETA's Animal Times in the mail. And I don't know why it came to me. I have zero recollection of filling anything out, of sending in anything, receiving. So, but I read it and I went vegetarian overnight. And it was the same thing. It was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess this is the next step. And I didn't like vegetables, or I thought I didn't like vegetables. It was always like my parents still pushing them on me, even at that age. And I didn't know how to cook. So it very much was like, well, I've made this choice. Now I got to make it work.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I think I've got this sort of like hobby horse theory that animal testing in particular is like a really important entry point for people to get into animal issues. And it seems kind of counterintuitive because animal testing is one of those things that has, it has like a scientific sort of shield in front of it. Yeah. But it also ties into human health, and not in the case of cosmetics, but like in the case of, medical testing and things like that. It ties into human health in a way that you would think would really be like a hard line for people against or like to be for it, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways it seems much more quote unquote like important than eating meat, right? Like we want cures for diseases and we want safe products and that sort of thing. But over and over again I hear that people's entry point into caring about animals is from being exposed to something related to animal testing. Mm-hmm. And I've done a couple of talks recently talking about how so many milestones in the animal rights movement for the past 150 years have been related to animal experimentation. Like the thing that consistently moves the movement forward are campaigns related to animal experimentation, which is kind of, I think, not so much the case in the last 10 years for a bunch of reasons, but yeah.
That's really interesting. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about all of the emails that I've gotten over the last 15 years or so from like PCRM saying like victory, where this place is not testing anymore, or they've stopped using dogs or monkeys, and yeah, you don't see that coming out of the animal agriculture system at all.
No, not really.
Yeah.
The wins in animal agriculture tend to be smaller, tend to be much more incremental, tend to be fewer and further between. They can be bigger, like things like Prop 12 or big victories. But the larger and longer term victories are harder fought, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like you made the point about how animal testing really speaks to this, keeping us safe, fixing our health, curing things. And that, yeah, why are we so horrified by animals being used that way and pushing to make change? And I mean, maybe it's the fact that science can do that and there's more ability to find ways around that. Like, are we so much more emotionally attached to what we consume?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it might be species related in the sense that like a lot of the things that you see coming from animal experimentation campaigns, for example, anti-animal experimentation campaigns are looking at species like primates or dogs and cats, or even mice, which people tend to not care about mice in a broad sense. But there's something about I think there's just something about what's done to animals in those contexts that really feels torturous in a way that like when you see an animal in a cage in a farm, you kind of think, well, the general public might kind of think, well, maybe they're in a cage, like maybe they don't care that they're in a cage, or maybe they don't, so whatever, whatever kind of like logical excuses people might have for it. But the seeing like, I mean, I think especially cosmetics testing in particular strikes people as a very frivolous kind of like activity. And I think people on a gut level kind of understand or want to believe that there has to be a better way for science to find these things rather than just essentially just like dipping animals in chemicals or whatever it may be. That there has to be a more sophisticated way of doing this, or there has to be a more scientific way of doing this. And sure enough, there are, and there are more and more developing all the time. So I think the opposition to animal experimentation has existed for almost as long as animal experimentation has been going on. But now it's very much caught up with the technological reality of replacement and refinement of those techniques.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe, hopefully, we can learn how to see the same level of horror in the animals that are used for food. Fingers crossed, right? Speaking of that, so one of the things that we briefly chatted about when we met a couple of weeks ago is that you've done undercover investigations. Have these been at like factory farming type scenarios? Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so from around 2009 until about 2015 or so, 2016, I was an investigator for a bunch of different organizations, and covering a bunch of different issues. So I did investigations on chicken farms, pig farms, dairy farms, mink farms, fox farms, and largely those investigations focused around animals used for food and animals used in fashion. The biggest investigation that I was a part of was took place over the course of like a year and a half, and was across Canada, going to dozens of mink farms, well, fur farms, really, because they were mink and foxes. And but probably the most like significant, the biggest sort of investigation that I did on my own, not on behalf of a group, was when I was working on, I did a documentary film about animal experimentation called Maximum Tolerated Dose. And in that film, I wanted to show how, I wanted to tell a bunch of different stories, and I wanted to talk about the stories of animals used in experimentation, but from the perspective of animals who had been used in experiments before. And part of that involved thinking about not just, the animal in the lab, for example, or the animal on on the factory farm, but thinking about where they came from beyond that. And so I did an investigation into the monkey trade in Southeast Asia, because monkeys that are used in animal experimentation in, say, North America or Europe, they come from Southeast Asia. That is where long-tail macaques, which are the most common monkeys in experiments, they come from Southeast Asia, and they're factory farmed, just like any other animal that's used in food production, let's say. And so what happens is they are captured in forests and rivers around countries like Thailand and Cambodia. They are bred in large, several thousands of monkeys in one farm in places like Laos and China. And then they're sort of, because the trade in them is supposed to be regulated internationally, they're sort of laundered and given a kind of new registration, new identity as captive bred, because you're allowed to captive breed monkeys. You're not allowed to wild catch monkeys and then breed them. And so that was part of the film that I was doing, and that was an investigation that took a couple of different months. But I feel like I'm rambling a bit, and maybe you had like a more of a question on what, like, about the investigative work. But yes, I have done investigations kind of around a bunch of different industries.
Yeah. I guess kind of just if you have like an experience maybe that you'd like to share, just to kind of give people an idea. Because, my listeners, there's a lot of vegans that tune in to Did You Bring the Hummus? And there's a lot of people who are not yet vegan that are tuning in and maybe don't really know about this or what it takes to do something like this. So if you have something along those lines you'd like to share, that'd be great.
Yeah, I guess, I had such a the first ever, maybe this will be an edit, I'm starting and stopping. The first ever investigation that I did was in Spain, with a group called Igualdad Animal, now called Animal Equality. And we were doing an investigation about like on chicken farms surrounding Madrid. And that was going to culminate in an open rescue where we were going to take several, where the animal equality activists were going to take several of the chickens and take them to a sanctuary. And we did all of the things that you normally do when you're doing an investigation. You look at satellite picture, Google Earth pictures of the farms. You try and figure out how you're going to get in. You have a driver, you have someone looking out, you do that sort of thing. And then so, it's a full moon. The moon is sort of like shining down on the hill. It's very peaceful, and you can smell the farm before you see it. And
Mm.
and then you kind of come over this hill, and down the hill you see this sort of like compound, and there's four big buildings, and each big building holds about 40,000 chickens. And so it's I mean, not a small farm. 160,000 chickens is not
Yeah.
nothing, but not actually a very big farm. There are much bigger farms than that.
That was horrifying.
Yeah. And so we are looking down at this field, or looking down on the farm, and you can sort of hear the hum of the fans and things like that, but it still feels very abstract. It just looks like an industrial building.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the memory that sticks out to me so much is actually going into the farm for the first time. We had to climb in through this like weird like vent window, and then sort of like coming into one of the corridors. The corridors are very long, and so you have this um you get the like converging lines of perspective, almost like when you're looking down a road and it looks like the lines meet.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long the rows are, just like so long.
Wow.
And you're just seeing cages full of birds, and the cages are stacked several rows on top of each other, and there's, I think, like 4 or 5 rows, so they're kind of they're up around like 6 or 7 feet tall. And there's 4 to 6 birds in a cage, and it's just like cages as far as you can see, as far down as you can see, disappearing into like a horizon of more cages.
Yeah.
And my first thought keep in mind, I had already been vegan for 4 or 5 years at this point. And my first thought that I had, and so I'm kind of like, and I'm very nervous. So I'm scrambling to get my camera gear, and I'm kind of getting everything ready. And my first thought, when I kind of like took a pause and looked around, was like, wow, like it's not all propaganda, like
Mm.
it's not all like vegan. Like, even though I had been vegan for 5 years, I had seen like horrific videos. I had like experienced the sort of, for lack of a better word, like vegan media
Mm-hmm.
around these issues, and believed it. I believed that these things happened.
Yeah.
But there was nothing that really had prepared me for what it would be like to actually see it.
Yeah.
And the feeling of realizing that it wasn't all bullshit, like it wasn't like a story that people had made up. It wasn't, again, yeah, like propaganda is the word that I always use talking about it, because people would say things to me like, oh, that's just like vegan propaganda.
Right.
And just having like the embodied experience of being in there and being like, wow, this is really for real. And this is just one place among so many where this exists, was really overwhelming. And so, yeah, that's a story I try to relate to people, because I think there's this sort of well, one, I wish that there was a way for everyone to experience that. I have somewhat mixed feelings about the kind of like vigils outside of slaughterhouses and that sort of thing, because I think seeing animals like in trucks, for example, is very different than seeing them in the farms.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't recommend that like everyone just tries to go and break into a farm, and because it's dangerous and illegal, and you could be putting yourself and others at risk. But I do wish that there was a way to translate that experience to people because it is very visceral. It's very the next thing that I noticed after sort of realizing that was that uh, it's very quiet in the farm, at
Mm.
least at night. Some farms keep the lights on 24 hours a day because that helps stimulate egg production. But in this farm in particular, it was dark, and so we had flashlights. And when it's dark, it's very quiet. The chickens are all trying to sleep,
Mm.
and so there is this like very eerie silence. The fans are going, but you hear this kind of whoop, whoop, whoop. You
Mm.
hear this all these little like bird sounds, like
Yeah.
little tiny chirps and whoops. And as other team members in the investigation are walking along the corridors, you can hear the bird, like you can hear the bird sounds kind of like following them along the way. Very intense, very intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Now, when it comes to, well, thank you for sharing that. That is so powerful. I'm feeling a lot of things right now.
Mm.
Um, when it comes to open rescue,
Mm.
how do you choose who you take?
Well, I mean, I was in the fortunate position that I was like a documenting person, so I didn't make those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know that in certain cases, it's animals who might be, injured, animals who, um, you know, uh, might need might have like a clear need for veterinary care. I mean, all the animals in these farms need
Right.
veterinary care, but like because of the living conditions that they're in, they're so prone to all kinds of different injuries, and so I know that sometimes the decisions are made on that basis. Yeah, but I was never part of making those choices. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, what a heart-wrenching thing
Of
to
course.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, now you're doing some different work.
Yeah, you could say that.
Tell me about Faunalytics. Why does it exist? What do you guys do? What's your role?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little bit of a story about how I came to be at Faunalytics, which was I was still on the road doing investigations. In 2014, I was doing this mink farm investigation, and um I had been applying to work in the nonprofit sector, in the animal sector. I had applied to, gosh, Humane Society International and World Animal Protection and these other organizations. But 2013, 2014 was a very different time in terms of like the movement and the sort of the potential to like have a career in the movement.
Mm.
Because I came up in the movement when it was still very like punk rock and like people sleeping on floors and no one's making any money and everyone's just poor and eating, having potlucks and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And people are still doing that. But I got hired while I was still doing investigative work, and Faunalytics was still called the Humane Research Council. So HRC was founded in 2000 by Che Green, and it had been a sort of it the purpose of it was to try to bring a sort of like market research or a data driven perspective to animal advocacy. Che came from an advocate background, but also had a background in market research and had a sense that, when big companies want to know if like something is working or not, they do research about it. They spend some resources to like figure out what works and what doesn't, in order to get their message out there. And so Che had the idea which was extremely novel at the time, of like, well, why don't we apply this to animal advocacy? And so HRC did that in the form of, client work for different organizations, and maintaining a repository of research on their website. And because I had an academic background in animal issues as well, like I did my undergrad and my master's on animal rights related topics, I was able to read academic journal articles and make sense of them, basically. And so when I saw that HRC was looking for someone to maintain their research library, which basically involved, reading articles and putting them into plain language, I and this is for an animal organization, and it was part time. I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
I'm on the road. I'm on the road a lot. I am doing investigative work. I can do this job from anywhere, and it suits a lot of my interests and my skills. And so, Che and Che was very cool about me still doing investigative work, even though he knew it was dangerous and you know, um, just complicated. I like to sort of compare it to him sort of like adopting a feral cat. He sort of like lured me into the house bit by bit, like, oh, maybe you want to do 25 hours a week now, maybe you want to do 30, like it was very gradual. And over the course of a few years, I became a full-time employee there. And at the time, it was myself and when I was hired, it was myself and Che and research director Catherine. And little did I know that within 6 months we would release probably the most notorious thing that we've ever done, which is our study of current and former vegetarians and vegans in the US. And that study, which many people know and many people, at least at the time, hated us for, was a study that found that basically over 80% of people who tried to go vegetarian or vegan went back to eating animal products within 2 years. And this was not good news. This was not good news for anybody, really. And it was unfortunate too, because there's nothing the media likes more than vegans hating themselves.
Yep.
So it got a lot of coverage, like hundreds of media mentions, CNN, MSNBC, like all these, the kind of media coverage like you just can't buy, right?
Yeah.
And so that brought Faunalytics to so I get hired. We released that study, I think, within the first 3 months that I'm there. And then the following year, we rebrand as Faunalytics. And to be clear, the rebrand was in process well before the study came out. It takes a long time to rebrand and come up with logos and do a website redesign, all that. But it was also good in the sense that Humane Research Council was a confusing name for people. People thought we were like a group that did that advocated for humane animal experimentation, which, like, I suppose we were, but that wasn't why we were called that. And so Faunalytics grew from there, and from a staff of essentially one full-time employee and two part-time employees, we slowly grew, and now there's about a dozen of us. We have been putting out original research and adding to our research repository for the last decade or so. And now we've sort of, over the last like 5 or 6 years, we've expanded a lot of the offerings that we have as well into like infographics, videos, more visual resources, more different resource types. Yeah. And our goal is really to provide animal advocates with a place that they can go to when they're looking for data and insights on whatever issue that they're working on. So whether it's, greyhound racing or companion animal food or farmed animal welfare or insect sentience or you name it. We do our best to cover it one way or another.
That's amazing. What an incredible thing to have available to people who are looking for that kind of information. Regarding that study that you mentioned.
Sure, yeah.
What are the reasons? Do we just have the numbers of who went back? Like, do we know why? Or yeah.
Yeah. So there's a number of factors that contribute to this, right? And we got a lot of pushback when that study came out because people, especially those in like the sort of like the hardcore like vegan community, sort of had this perspective of like, well, if someone like decides to not be vegan, then they were never really vegan. Like they were just, sort of experimenting or whatever. But when it comes to social science research, you design studies, you control for variables, and you have a number of ways that you can do that. One of the ways that you can do that is you can ask people how they identify. You can say, do you identify as an omnivore, a vegetarian, a vegan, blah, blah, blah. And there are problems with that. Because someone can say, I'm a vegetarian, and we found this, and we have studies in our library that show this, that, many people who identify as vegetarians still eat meat with some frequency.
Yep.
Some people who identify as vegan still eat animal products with some frequency. It may only be once a month, or it may only be a couple times a year. But the sort of, the idea of like the pure vegan or the pure vegetarian, a lot of times in studies, when you get to the nitty gritty and you ask people about their consumption, or you get people to do like a food diary, the numbers are much lower than what we consider, or what we sort of like think, when we think that the vegan population, or the vegan population has traditionally hovered around like the 2 to 3% mark in the United States. The vegetarian population, like 8 to 10%, fluctuating plus minus some percentage points here and there. It's different in different parts of the world. Some, parts of Southeast Asia or South Asia, the vegetarian population might be up around 25, 30%. These things fluctuate, but essentially part of that slippage that we found is attributable to that like people's self-identification does not always like correlate to like a pure diet. Now, in a lot of ways, that like if you're very attached to like a pure idea of veganism or a pure idea of vegetarianism, that's a problem. If you're not as attached to that idea, though, it becomes a much more sort of like sobering look at what we are trying to achieve and what we are trying to, how big of a tent we're trying to make, right?
Yeah.
Like when I think of my own, because I definitely like respect your question, and I understand where it comes from, because we do want to do our best to retain people from from going from eating very few or no animal products to going back to eating them regularly. But for myself personally, at least on a tactical level, if I know someone who is vegetarian, who says I'm a vegetarian, but they eat meat, even once a week, I would say, sure, you can be a vegetarian if you want. Yeah, it's just a word. Like in my mind, in a practical sense, I'm like, it's just a word. You can call yourself that if you want. The reality is another thing, but in a practical sense, you're eating vegetarian the vast majority of the time, and that's great. So I try not to get too hung up on the nomenclature and like what people call themselves. I certainly want people to eat as few or no animal products if they can. Um, but the retention part for me is definitely not about what people call themselves. I don't really care about making sure people keep calling themselves vegan or calling themselves vegetarian. It's more about trying to figure out what are the ways that um, consuming animal products becomes like tempting again, or becomes like a health issue, or becomes like or even like a social issue, right? Like I've been vegan now for 21 years, and it's tough sometimes in social situations, feeling left out of gatherings, or feeling alienated from friends, having debates at the dinner table. It's a grind, and it's like demoralizing, and it's very and especially being in the working in the job that I have, like you can feel like people don't take you seriously, or they think your job is stupid, or what, I don't know, whatever, right? Like it's all of those natural human emotions that you have when you care about something really deeply, and you have the sense that people around you don't care all that much. So it's complicated, and I we Faunalytics, our 6,000th entry in our research library was a big, huge resource that one of our board members spearheaded putting together, which is called The Science of Making and Keeping Vegans. And it's a huge resource that brings together dozens of different studies on what are all the different factors that make people reduce their animal product consumption, and what keeps them reducing their animal product consumption. It's less focused on like making sure that people do not touch a drop of butter for the rest of their life, and more about trying to think about the really practical ways that people make choices, and how those choices lead to like larger change.
Okay. Yeah. I sometimes get hung up on the words because I feel like it can stop meaning anything. Of course, I mean, but
I'm a big, words matter, like to me personally. I try to be very precise with my language. I try to be very, I'm a words guy. I really am.
Me too.
I'm a writer, and I'm an editor. And when people use a word incorrectly, I'm always like, I'm that annoying guy that's like, that's not what that means.
Yeah.
I recently discovered that the word, this is how much of a words person I am. I recently discovered that the word obtuse does not mean what I thought it meant. And that there's another word, abstruse, which is actually what means what I thought, which is like intentionally abstract and vague. Obtuse means like kind of dumb and intentionally like dumbed down, which is not what I thought it meant at all.
Yeah.
And I have like a mini crisis about how often I've like misused this word. So I get where you're coming from. Like the words do matter, and I would prefer that people use the word that most accurately describes themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my concern with like, when I do feel that way, if someone's like, oh yeah, I'm vegetarian, I had this great chicken dish last night. I want to be like, so when vegetarians are out in the world meeting somebody new, or a vegan is out in the world ordering at a restaurant, or going, to a friend's house for the first time and their friend is not vegan and they say, I'm vegan. And this person has only heard other people say, yeah, I'm vegan while they're eating a cheeseburger or having pizza. That leads that person to believe that vegans eat these things. Or you go to a restaurant and you order something that you think is right because the server confirms that there's no butter in it, or that, the butter is vegan because they think that vegans eat butter. So that's more where I get kind of worked up about the word. But what I would love to see is that we don't need a word, that the people consuming animals need to tell us that they do that by labeling themselves, because we've become the norm. We've become the majority and they are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I understand that as well. I think I would likely fall somewhere in the middle, and that I think there's like something in there about like leading by example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like it sounds like one of the things that really bothers you about it, which like likewise I think is problematic, which is that like when you occupy like an identity position that's not like the norm, then everything you do gets like scrutinized and paid attention to, because it's not the normal way that people do things. And so there is so much more attention paid, to how vegans eat and how vegetarians eat in a way that is very unfair. It's just like so silly, and but that sort of perspective, I think, leads a lot of vegans and vegetarians to get their back up about that sort of thing. And you're always in like a social situation where you're having to say, for example, like, yeah, like, is this cooked in cream or whatever, right?
Right.
And it's uncomfortable, it's not fun.
So I think it's easier for those of us who have come to it from that perspective of we're trying to distance ourselves from those industries that are harming animals, whether it's through testing on them or putting them through a process to be grown and then slaughtered to be eaten, versus someone who finds their way first through their health. And if they don't make it far enough to embrace the ethical piece of veganism, when it's so much more about that they start off just eating, a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, and maybe they stop using products that are tested on animals because they are learning about that as they go through the process of understanding what it is to be vegan. But I feel like, and I don't study these things like you do, so I may be just making this up and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's a lot easier when we're doing it for ourselves. And it makes me think of diet culture. Like, it's so hard to be on a diet because it's just for me, and self-control is a thing, and, and it's hard, and everybody around me is eating, cake, and I don't get to have cake, but it's just because I decided I shouldn't have cake because being fat is bad, or, whatever it is. And then but when you come to it from this other perspective where the animals are the reason, it makes it so much easier in those uncomfortable moments to stick with what you've decided. So that doesn't make the situation easier per se, having that difficult conversation, having to ask multiple times, are you sure? Are you sure this isn't cooked in cream or whatever? Or having that argument with a person who believes that eating meat is natural and normal, and you're a weirdo because of it, because you don't do that. I feel like it makes it easier to stick with it, and you don't fall back and go, you know what, it would just be, and even if you have the thought, it would just be easier if I didn't know all this stuff and I could just be like everybody else. But you can't do it because you're so committed to not being a person who contributes to that harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Traditionally we sort of talk about veganism in general as having like three motivations, or like three sort of like potential motivations, like the animal ethics motivation, the environmental motivation, and the health motivation. There are there's many others, but really like those are the three that people talk about and study the most. And there's evidence that shows that different motivations might be more effective in, yeah, like you're saying, and I'm gonna like put this in like quote unquote like sticking to the diet, right? um but I'm putting it in quotes, like quote unquote sticking to it, because depending on what your motivation is, like sticking to it looks different, right? Like being in needing to cut animal products out of your diet because of health reasons um is much more of like a personal harm reduction, an act of personal harm reduction rather than anything else, right? Like you're trying to get your health right, you're trying to get your blood pressure down, you're trying to get your cholesterol down, like all whatever the case may be. And those are achievable goals, right? Like with a vegan diet, you can really affect your health in positive ways by, like you're saying, like sticking to it. But the health motivation has, to a certain degree, like an end point where when you arrive at that end point, wow, my I don't even know what cholesterol, LDL. I don't know what are the different ones. My LDL cholesterol is such and such. I've like really done a great job of like doing this. Now I have to maintain it. But now that I'm here, I can like have a burger every once in a while. I'm not like in a like, you're still in a certain sense successful at your diet, right? And I don't think people who have a health motivation for their diet see stepping outside of the diet occasionally as like a failure, because in many ways it still is a success for them, because the goal was never to end animal exploitation or that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Where I think that vegans have like ethical vegans have a much more sort of like lofty sense of what the diet is about. And we can have, I think it's worth having a debate on whether like, myself, like coming from a sort of activist, kind of like anti-capitalist background, there's a big part of me that says like, we're not going to dismantle animal agriculture by just buying different stuff. Like that's not what it's all about either.
Yeah.
So I tend to shy away from sort of valuing one approach over the other, because even the person who is eating for a health motivation or for an environmental motivation, eating a vegan diet, I don't really care how they get there. They're just like eating fewer animals. And in many ways, like it's funny because I think I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit. I'm saying, oh, I come from this anti-capitalist perspective, man. Like, we got to do other things to bust the system. But at the same time, I have a profoundly kind of like practical view of things, which is that anything that reduces animal suffering, I am good with. I don't need it to be 100%. I don't need people around me to be 100% vegan. Every meal that they keep animals off their plate is a win. And having been involved in animal advocacy for 20 years, that is the kind of thing that like keeps me going. Because if I think this is a very long game. Um,
Yeah.
and if I got too hung up on the sort of the end goal of it,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, I think it would be a dark place to be.
Yeah.
Well, there's still a long way to go.
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel the same way. I live in this world and I know how I have the basic understanding of humans and how you can't make somebody do something and you have to let them find their way and hopefully you encourage and inspire by being who you are and that they pick up on some things and make some of those choices themselves. But in my heart, I'd like it for all of it to be over now and the animals to not be suffering
Sure.
anymore. So it is tough to have that feeling and have that vision of what you'd really like. But like you, I hang on to hearing people ask me, when people ask me questions, they want to know about how can they eat less animals or what changes can they make in their life, and I do lean on that a lot too to give me hope as well.
Yeah, and I think like from an advocacy perspective, and I think from a personal perspective too, I tend to look inward when it comes to like the larger strategy things, right? Like I try to look I want our movement to like look inward more
Mm,
on what we've done that works and what doesn't work. And when I got involved in animal advocacy, it was still very much like kind of like a go vegan or go F yourself kind of like vibe,
yeah.
like for lack of a better word, that
Hmm.
was the vibe. And I loved it. I was like, this is great. I
Yeah.
love this. I'm angry and
Hmm.
I love feeling very righteous.
Oh
And
yeah.
there is something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is that sometimes in political movements, what happens is the political movement like fails to attract public attention or fails to attract like popular support. And we saw this with like leftist politics in the US in the last like 4 or 5 years, which is that like everyone now is looking at how many different people have swung right in all of these different ways and is saying, see, they were just a lost cause, they're just misogynist, they're
Mm,
just such and such. And very few people on the left are asking questions like, how did we fail, how did we
yeah.
fail in attracting these people to our cause? And I think that the animal movement needs to do more of that kind of reflection, less of the kind of like looking outward at the general public and going, look at all these awful animal abusers.
Mm.
We're so much better than them. Regardless, it feels great. Feels great to
Oh
say
yeah.
and to look to have that perspective. But it's not super useful. And it places people in a sort of category where they kind of feel like a lost cause,
Mm,
where they're never going to turn one way or the other. And when you get down to it, like public opinion data shows that people really care about animals. Like they want to care about animals. All of the conditions are there.
mhm,
The sort of like psychological and emotional conditions are there to motivate people to like join our cause. And you've seen with campaigns like Prop 12 in California, um, most California is not vegetarian or vegan. There's maybe a
right.
higher percentage in California than in other states, but it's still a majority, omnivore state.
Mhm,
But they voted for a really significant animal welfare reform that had really big ripple effects across the industry. And it's because if given the choice, people really want to do right by animals. Very few people are like, F animals, I don't care.
Right.
Beat the hell out of them. I don't, very few people are like that.
Yeah.
Um, and even fewer will admit it, And so I think I'm rambling again, but I think the sort of the larger sort of like my larger point is that more reflection on like what can I do to sort of like bring people into animal advocacy, like does having like I think about like the labor movement. I used to be a union organizer, and if I only was a union organizer with people who had the exact same politics as me, I would have been by myself, trying to organize the shop and like get people to join the union. So you have to take when you're trying to achieve like a big goal, and ending animal exploitation is maybe one of the biggest goals that there is. You have to take like the broadest possible view of the broadest possible coalition you can build. And that's going to include people who still do consume animals. That's going to include people who still, who have different political views, have different economic views, like all kinds of different stuff. And, in many ways, I think what am I? I'm 45 now. The 25-year-old self would be like, "You sell out," But this is reality. I live in reality now. I used to live in like anarchist fantasy land back then, and I live in reality now. And you got a coalition build, and you got to think about how to bring people in who see a big barrier there.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I too, we're the same age, and I was doing the same thing, I was getting in people's faces and saying things like, I don't eat anything that had a mother. I don't eat anyone that had a face. And I can just see the look on people's faces when I would do that, and like the horror, but then also fuck this girl. Like they weren't interested in anything else I had to say after doing something like that.
Yeah.
So,
when I talk to like I've talked to many animal advocates over the years, and not a single animal advocate I've ever talked to said, you know what, somebody yelled at me on the street and I just decided to stop eating meat.
Right.
Like, no one has ever said that. Not a single person. And I know that I'm just like, that's just anecdotal evidence, but from a data perspective, that doesn't tell us much. But I suspect if you asked all of your animal advocate friends, did you go vegan by someone shaming you or telling you you're an idiot, or the answer is probably no, right?
Right.
Because those things are emotional steam valves, right? That's something that makes us feel good to say we need those things. We need things to make us feel better, because gosh, it's a horrific issue to care about.
Yeah.
But tactically, that's not the way,
Right.
I'll share. I used to when I would see people on like horse-drawn carriages, anytime I would be in a town, like they don't have them in my town, but anytime I would be somewhere where there was horse-drawn carriages, they go so slow, right? So I would just walk up beside them and go like, "You're disgusting. Like, you should be ashamed of yourself." And it's always a rich person who's just looking at me like, "Oh my gosh, like this person is, who is this?" Right. And it felt great, right? Like it feels good to do that. But I don't think it changed a single person's mind. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do, and what we're all trying to do, right? Like we all want to move the needle, and the needle doesn't really move. If anything, it probably goes backwards when we
I know, but it seems like we all go through that phase where we've got to like scream it to someone, to many people, to really get in your face. I used to have a t-shirt that had a picture of a slaughtered cow's head, like hanging in the slaughterhouse, blood dripping. And then it said next to it, "Do you want fries with that?"
Wow.
And and I would be walking around, in early 20s, like, go ahead, ask me about this. And was so pleased to, try to make somebody feel like shit about it. And then, you do that enough. And then you go, they never ask me anything. They're not curious about this at all. But at first, I think you don't even realize they're not asking you anything. And then when you're like, I really want to change people's minds about it, though. I don't want to just make people feel badly. I want them to go, oh, there's something else I could do. Is I think that, especially in the early 2000s and before, the word vegan is much more out in the world now than back then. I think some people didn't even know that was an option.
Absolutely. I mean, for better or worse, I think like the word vegan has gotten a lot of press, like whether it's like celebrities going vegan or different like vegan products hitting the shelves, like it has definitely become a lot more culturally there's a lot more cultural awareness about what it is, or at least that the word exists, right? People still don't necessarily know what it means all that much, but they have a sort of vague sense of it at the very least. I mean, things have progressed. Things are moving in a certain direction, but yeah, I mean, I I remember hearing a story, and I don't know how true this is, but I feel like enough people have told me it, that I believe it, which is, at one of the animal rights conferences in the early, I think it was in the early 2010s, and the details are going to be vague. I can't remember who was the speaker, but they started their talk by sort of doing a hand raise poll of the crowd saying like, how many people here would give up their job, how many people here would like give up their job to like save all the animals in the world? It's like, yeah, everyone raised their hand. How many people here would like risk their lives to like save animals? A bunch of people like raised their hand. How many people here would with so on and so on, like giving all these examples, and then ended with, and how many people here would put on a suit and tie for animals? And just like so few hands went up, right?
Yeah.
Because at the time, I mean, back in the punk days of the movement, it was very much concerned, like it was very much like a subculture, and that subculture was attached to like an identity position that was, when things are a subculture, they're attached to so many different things related to your identity. They're attached to the music you listen to, they're attached to the clothes you wear, they're attached to your hairstyle, your piercings and tattoos, like all of that stuff. And all of that's just decoration, and when I heard that story of this sort of crowd looking dumbfounded at someone asking them to like put on a suit and tie, the purpose of that question was to say like, are you like, how serious are you about trying to make things like institutional change or corporate commitments or like things like that, where you can have a quite a large effect on a really large number of animals, much more so than if you yourself personally just stop eating them. But it also got at the tension that a lot of people don't want to give up their dreadlocks, and they don't want to give up their pink hair, and they don't want to give up their cool like dead cow t-shirt to be more approachable, to be more to be the kind of like, when we're talking earlier about like being the role model where you're being scrutinized, it feels like vegans got to be healthier,
Mm-hmm.
smarter, more articulate, better dressed,
Yep.
more happy than like anyone else, right? Like we
Yeah.
have to be the role models, and that's a burden to carry, but this is the burden that we chose to carry, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The door is over there, you know? If we don't want to do it anymore, the door is over there. There's a million restaurants down the road from you that are happy to have you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try and keep that in mind. You know, I'm still a punk rock at heart. I'm still a punk rocker at heart. I still really, I believe in eliminating exploitation, not simply reducing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but all of the animals that are alive right now, not just the billions and trillions that will be alive in the future, all of the animals that are alive right now need help also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carol, this conversation has been amazing. And I'm so sorry that we've gone over. So thank you for your extra time. I'm usually much better at keeping track of that, but just lost in our conversation.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Yeah. I've got one more question for you, though. How does hummus show up in your life?
I'll admit I don't eat as much hummus as I used to. Like when I first went vegan, I mean, well, if you went vegan in your 20s, you remember things like Rice Dream and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
other add tofuti ice cream and these other things like that. So the options were a lot more limited. Um, I have a secret, well, I guess not so secret if I'm saying it on the podcast, uh, resentment towards newer vegans because they will never know how
Yo.
bad some of those things tasted. Um, but I used to eat a lot more hummus than I do now because it was one of the few options that were out there. And I used to live in Toronto, and there was a Toronto hummus company called Sunflower Kitchen that was amazing. Well, they still exist actually. They make the best hummus. It's like the creamiest kind. They've got like really good
Nice.
flavors. So hummus now largely shows up for me as like a thing. I use it as like a dip for pizzas,
Oh.
like pizza crusts.
Mm-hmm.
I use it sometimes on toast to make sandwiches and things like that, or I use it to like dip tortilla chips into.
Yes.
But I don't. I don't eat as much of it as I used to.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Even on Did You Bring the Hummus? That's allowed.
Great. Okay, good. I didn't bring any hummus to my office with me, but I don't have a fridge in here, so
Same. Yeah. I never actually have hummus when we're talking about it.
you gotta have some.
Right. I should get a little fridge that I could just keep next to me and just pull out a different hummus every interview.
Yeah.
Carol, thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait for my listeners to hear this incredibly meaningful, heartfelt conversation.
No problem, Kimberly. It was great. Great to talk with you as well. If anyone wants to learn more about Faunalytics, just go to our website, faunalytics.org. I do regular office hours every Tuesday at noon. You can stop by and chat with me if you have an animal advocacy question. And yeah, we've got thousands of resources on our site. If you ever have trouble finding things, you can just email me, karol@faunalytics.org, KAROL at faunalytics.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All of those links that social media and everything, your website will be in the show notes as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Kimberly.
Welcome back. What a wonderful conversation. And I am so glad to know and to have learned so much about this incredible resource that is Faunalytics. I am so impressed by how this organization can and does support and enhance our movement. To connect with Karol, you can visit faunalytics.org, find them on Instagram at Faunalytics, Follow Karol on LinkedIn at karol-orzechowski and Faunalytics on LinkedIn at Faunalytics. As always, the links will be in the show notes so you can click right in and get right there. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends, because if you're finding something good here, they will too. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyoubringthehummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Tune in next time for my interview with Anna Balzer of Woodstock Farm Animal Sanctuary. Thanks for listening.